Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching the Demi Lovato documentary. I'm going to react to it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch.
This is so weird, talking to a camera by myself while my boyfriend's asleep. Oh my God, fiance.
Okay, so I have no idea, but one of the principles of early recovery that's well known is people will tend to want to jump into relationships very quickly. Now, there's nothing wrong with falling in love. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with having a relationship that only lasts for a little bit of time, as long as you're not harming each other in the process. Every relationship doesn't have to be perfect. Every relationship doesn't have to last forever. Most don't. So there's nothing wrong with having a short-term relationship or a relationship that is impulsive. But it's a well-known phenomenon within recovery that in early recovery, people going through recovery will often find themselves transitioning from substances to a human being. And they will become, quote unquote, addicted to a human being. Now, I don't like that phrase. Most people in addiction science won't use that phrase, but among people going through recovery, sometimes they will say that. So what are they referring to? And I'm not saying Demi is going through this. I really have no idea. But it's just, again, if I'm whenever I react to things, I'm always using it as a jumping off point for education. So why would we be concerned about that? Well, for some people, again, not everyone, but it is a trend enough that it's easily identified within recovery community. People will talk about this often. I think there's even a phrase for it. Comment below if you know the phrase for it, but there's some phrase in AA that identifies this, where you're recently sober and you're going through the steps, or you're going through therapy or going through recovery, and you get through the initial struggle, and maybe a month later, maybe a couple months later, you feel pretty good. You have managed to achieve sobriety for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And you just feel really good. You're like, okay, I'm out of the woods kind of. I'm still kind of in the woods. I'm still dedicated to sobriety. I'm still dedicated to going through the recovery process. But, I'm a little bit more relaxed. And then you might even meet someone in recovery. This is another thing that often happens, which isn't a bad thing. It's actually a really good idea to date someone in recovery if you're going through recovery, because that person is more likely to want to be sober. It's actually, when you're going through recovery, it's actually really hard to find someone who is completely clean, because most people aren't. So sometimes people in recovery are really good matches for each other, people who are dedicated to sobriety. And you are still having a lot of emotional struggles. Remember, I talked about this in previous reaction videos to the Demi Lovato documentary. There's a lot of emotions coming up because recovery is difficult. The shame of the hitting bottom several times is difficult. The reason why we got into addiction in the first place and substance use in the first place is often because of trauma and internalized shame. And the substance abuse gave us the ability to numb those feelings. They didn't take them away. They added to them. And so we already had trauma and shame. We kept piling on the substances, and that caused us to have more shame and more self-esteem problems, which we piled more substances on top of. And then we finally hit bottom enough, and we have a moment of clarity, as they call it, or something happens, and we now are achieving sobriety. And all those feelings come back, and it can be very overwhelming. And without substances, the individual might not have any way of really dealing with the feelings. And it can be a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of difficult days, and a lot of emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of being hostile with other people, maybe road rage, maybe yelling at your boss, maybe crying into your hands because someone got your order wrong at the McDonald's drive-thru. It's normal. I mean, that's normal anyway to some extent, but it's more pronounced during early recovery. Well, one of the ways that you can avoid your feelings is to dive into a romantic relationship. Now, there's nothing wrong with a romantic relationship, but if you are using the romantic relationship as an excuse to distract yourself from the hard work of trauma recovery and substance abuse recovery, then that's not such a great idea, particularly if you allow yourself to be tricked into thinking that you're over it. you've achieved sobriety. You're 60 days in. You're good. Everything's fine, and you're in love, and everything, and the person is supportive of your recovery, and you're doing all the things. Well, sometimes for some people, I've talked about in previous reaction videos, there's what we call an addict part of the brain. It's not really a part of the brain, but it's a metaphor that a lot of people going through recovery will talk about, that will influence you subtly. That addict part of the brain is trying to get you back into using, because that addict part of the brain really, really likes the warm blanket that they perceive, which is the substance use. It actually isn't a warm blanket. It's more like a straitjacket in some ways. But anyway, so it's always trying to get you to use again. It'll say, it's just a glass of wine, or you don't want to embarrass yourself at the birthday party. Just have a puff off the joint. Who cares? It's just one thing. People smoke pot on the weekend sometimes. Who cares? It's always these little voices. And of course, the addict part of the brain knows if you take that, drag, or you have that glass of wine, or you decide to hang out with this friend, even though you know that they're a bad influence on you, that it will lead to eventual use and back into the cycle of abuse, substance abuse. One of the ways that the addict brain will get people to go down that slippery slope is to move away from recovery a little bit and towards romantic love and sexual love, or romantic sexual activity. Because when you're in love, that eclipses a lot of things, including it can eclipse recovery. Again, there's nothing wrong with falling in love. Plenty of people fall in love in a healthy way in early recovery. But it's one of the things that people going through recovery want to watch out for. And the way that you compensate for it is that you make sure that the falling in love and all the new relationship energy that you're having with this new relationship does not take away from your hard work of substance abuse recovery, going through the steps, and possibly your trauma recovery process, which could be years and years. If you can do both, then great. But if you're finding yourself going, you know what, I don't want to go to an AA meeting this week. I'd rather just hang out with my boyfriend or my fiance all this week, then we're in some bit of a danger zone, possibly. Unknown, but it's definitely opening the door for something potentially bad happening. I have no idea if Demi is doing that. Just no idea. The other thing that some people in early recovery will talk about is, because you've been putting off your emotional growth, it's not exactly true, but it's kind of true. Because your emotional maturity is somewhat stunted by at least your sober emotional maturity is stunted because you've been using substances since you were 15 years old. Once you become sober, and I've talked about this before in previous videos, you basically have the emotional maturity of a 15-year-old, because all the time you were using, you were dealing with emotions and life with the substance abuse as a part of it. And now that you're sober, you have to completely relearn how to deal with things. And you might be dealing with emotions that you've never really dealt with before without substances. And so you can have the emotional maturity of a 15-year-old, which is fine. You go through the steps, you go to therapy, you keep growing, and over the next 5 or 10 years, your emotional maturity will catch up to your actual age. And one of the things that can happen is that you can love as if you were 15 years old. And when we're 15 years old, we love in a very 15-year-old way. Now, it's real love. I'm not going to say it's as puppy love. They'll say sometimes 15-year-olds. 15-year-old love is love. It's not like I'm going to be ageist in that way. But 15, we can all say, I'm guessing most of you are much older than 15, that our 15-year relationships were not exactly healthy. We didn't approach them in the healthiest of ways. We didn't have the best perspective. We were a bit blinded by our fantasy as opposed to the reality. And this can happen to people who are Demi's age. It can happen to people who are 45 and they're achieving sobriety and they start dating and they actually feel like they're going. And I've worked with clients with this, and a big part of my help with the 45-year-olds who have recently discovered sobriety and they're starting to date. I actually will normalize them and say it's okay that you feel like you're a 15-year-old with all sorts of raging hormones and all sorts of drama in your life. That's okay. That's to be expected. Just don't shame yourself. Just, allow life to be messy. But that's another reason why people in early recovery will often avoid relationships, because the relationships themselves can cause so much drama. Because, an average 15-year-old romantic relationship, let's just say, probably has above average drama when you look at relationships through the lifespan. And that drama can cause people to go back to substances. We can totally imagine that. You're going through a humongous fight with your partner, and you're all emotions are all on fire, and you don't know anything to do. Talking with your friends isn't going to work, and you turn to substances to calm the emotions down. Again, the addict part of the brain might even know that, look, your relationships tend to get dramatic, and there's probably going to be some fights in there, maybe even a breakup, and then that's when I'll pounce, and that's when you'll start using it. So that's another reason why people will tend to advise people in early recovery to just hold off on intense relationships. You can date maybe, but just hold off on intense romantic relationships. I don't know if Demi is going through that. There's no way for me to know, but maybe she'll talk about that. Let's watch.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught that, but this is the ring.
She texted me and said, I met the man that I'm going to marry. That was March 6th or 7th or something like that. And I think they've been together every single night since. And now they're getting married, so she was right.
Another thing is that the trauma that leads to substance abuse in the first place can also cause us to be confused about what relationships are good for us and what relationships are bad for us. I won't go into all the weeds on that, but I think we all understand that when we have relational traumas, which I believe Demi Lovato has from her father struggling and also her father dying, that our ability to detect healthy relationships in the beginning is actually compromised. A lot of you out there might relate to this, that the past 5 romantic relationships you've been in the beginning, you thought this is a perfect relationship, and then later realized not only is this relationship not great for me, it's actually like terrible for me. Why in the beginning was I feeling like it was perfect, and now I feel like it's the exact opposite of perfect, whatever that is? Well, that's another possibility, that substance abuse will hinder one's ability to learn from those mistakes. And thus we will, as we're going through recovery at the age of 30, and we're for the first time being sober, we might have the wisdom of a 15-year-old and unable to detect those kinds of problematic relationships in the beginning. We'll dive headfirst into it and then regret it later. Again, I have no idea I don't know. They're all talking about it like it's a great relationship, and I really hope that it is, and it very well could be. I'm just using this as a jumping off point to talk about that point. Let's watch again.
When she announced that she was engaged, I was very happy about that. I was so happy that she was with someone that was making her so happy.
I'm kind of scared to know life without quarantine with him.
Although there was a lot of concerns, we were all still really happy that she was just feeling so good and that she had somebody with her through this time.
The other thing that's not related to substance abuse is a lot of people, single people, going into quarantine, into the lockdown, would panic at the last minute thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to be locked down by myself. I'm not going to be able to date. I'm not going to be able to hang out with friends. So I've got to hook up with a partner right now. I need to find a partner now to get me through the lockdown. And so maybe it's similar to a phenomenon when people would go to war, like World War II or Vietnam War, the GIs would suddenly want to get married just before they left because you just worry about what's your future, and you want to have that secure base that you can go back to. Again, I have no idea if this applies to Demi Lovato. Maybe they'll be married the rest of their life, and this early relationship was a very wise choice. There's just no way for me to know at this point.
So my life has kind of flipped upside down. I'm no longer engaged.
Okay. I honestly did not say, I thought this whole episode was, for some reason in my head, I thought this episode was going to be maybe the last one. I don't know how many, this is the 4th episode. I don't know how many episodes there's going to be. Maybe there's going to be a bunch, but I thought this episode was going to be the last one because it seemed like they were heading in that direction narrative wise, where, you know, she's been in recovery and everything's great. And now she's found the perfect relationship and it's like riding off into the sunset and all of us can feel good about Demi Lovato's future. So I thought that's what this was going to be. And now we have confirmation of at least one conceptualization that I was hypothesizing. Let's see if she gets into the things I was talking about. I hope that she is at least talking with other people in early recovery and they're like, you had a classic mistake of early recovery and it's to be expected and it's fine. So maybe she'll talk about that. Let's watch.
I'm really sad that things ended the way that they did. Good news is I haven't picked up any hard drugs or anything like that.
Okay, so on one hand, that's great. She says, I haven't picked up any hard drugs, but that implies she has picked up soft drugs. There's a myth in early recovery that people relapsing will fall into. And there's this whole thing that I want to acknowledge, which is harm reduction. So we have the recommendation of complete sobriety, meaning no intoxicating substances at all. Some people even saying no caffeine, no benzodiazepines prescribed by the doctor, no pain meds, no cigarettes. Some people will go that far, but at the very least, a lot of people in the abstinence-only mindset will say no alcohol and no marijuana, which are considered by some to be soft drugs, right? Now, alcohol kills a lot of people every year. So this notion that somehow alcohol is like safe and heroin is dangerous is a complete falsehood. Now, heroin is dangerous, very dangerous because of accidental overdoses. But alcohol kills I don't know how many people around the planet. Lots. I know it kills lots of people. Drunk driving alone, but also health problems, violence, suicide is actually associated with alcohol. In fact, as a clinician, when I'm working with clients and when I'm training my trainees, one of the very first questions you need to ask your clients if they suffer from suicidal ideation is if they drink at all. Because if they drink and they're suicidal, they might often overdrink. And when one is over drinking, they're very prone to taking an action on suicide. And by the way, if you or you know anyone who is struggling with suicidal thoughts, you want to go to the hotline.org on the internet. You can call the numbers, you can chat with the people, you can read the articles. We want to help people get through those difficult times. And research shows that if we can get people through the week or so where they have an intense motivation for suicide, we can actually get them through that difficult time and they will equalize and they'll thank us for it later. They'll thank us that we helped them get through those times. But anyway, so make sure that you do that. But anyway, so this notion of soft drugs, alcohol and marijuana, for some people who are going through recovery, they will start to play that game. Remember, that addict voice will say, it's just alcohol. People drink alcohol. You can drink alcohol. Now, some people can. And the harm reduction, so there's the complete abstinence model, and then there's a harm reduction model, which is, maybe abstinence is the way that you need to be, but, maybe you can use recreationally. We don't know. And the people on this side really hate the people on this side. And why is that? Well, because not everyone, but so there's two schools of thought within recovery. Some people say complete sobriety. There's just no question about it. And other people will say, well, maybe complete sobriety, but maybe not. Maybe you can actually have a manageable life with recreational marijuana use or recreational alcohol use. Maybe that's possible. Now, why do these two camps conflict so often? It's because for some people, they will play this game. The addict voice will say, it's just alcohol, it's just pot, because the addict voice knows that if you start drinking, it'll lead to this, it'll lead to that, it'll lead to that, and then eventually you're using everything. And the addict mind is like, yay, I knew that that one glass of wine would eventually lead to using heroin every day. And that's why the complete abstinence only people, they don't want anyone offering an idea that using recreational is an option, because if you allow that to live in your mind, you might go down that slippery slope of using more. So anyway, she just said the breakup, thank goodness I did not turn to hard drugs, but that makes me wonder if she's using quote unquote soft drugs, which is a bit of a problematic word. It implies that that soft drugs are okay or something. And we all understand that alcohol, particularly marijuana to a lesser extent when you add up all the harm, but we all understand that alcohol can cause a lot of problems. And Demi even talked about that. She, when she was using a lot before, alcohol was a big part of that. So now I'm worried.
I'm hanging in there. Ugh. It's just shitty.
Now, the other thing I'll say is that in my experience working with people who have the level of addiction problem, substance use problem that Demi seems to have, I can't diagnose from afar, but the things we've seen in the documentary, things she said, indicate a certain level, an upper tier problem with substance abuse compulsion, that people with that level of a problem will have a recovery process that will be over the span of many years. Meaning that, and we've seen a little bit of it already, she got sober and then she relapsed, and then she was sort of sober and then not. And we will see that's a typical story of experimentation of like, okay, I got a year sober. You know what? How? I'll just try drinking. And then they might recreational drink for about 6 months and everything seems fine. And then boom, they go off the deep end. And then they're like, okay, I guess I can't drink alcohol. And then maybe like 3 years later, they go through a breakup and they start smoking marijuana, and that seems to be fine for another year. And then boom, it completely blows up in their face. And for 3 years, they're using heroin again. And then they get back on the wagon. And so it's a very common story. And we want to normalize that because we don't want to shame people who go through those processes. But as a viewer, and if you're a fan of Demi Lovato, you might want to prepare emotionally yourself. In a sense, all the fans who worry about Demi Lovato essentially should probably go to an Al-Anon meeting, which is kind of interesting. Al-Anon, so you have Alcoholics Anonymous, which is and Narcotics Anonymous, and other groups like that, which are for the people suffering from the substance abuse problem. And then you have Al-Anon and other kinds of groups like that, which are for the family members. And a lot of the support that you get in those groups is learning how to cope with the fact that you're watching someone that you care about destroy their lives or put themselves at risk. There's a huge emotional toll. And I guess what I'm saying to you is if you're a fan of Demi Lovato, you might want to prepare emotionally for the possible ups and downs. Now, you can care about her, you can like her, you can worry about her, but you want to check in with your own feelings because she might be going through a thing for a while. Now, she might not be, but you want to prepare yourself for that as well. And if you have someone in your life that you're close to, your parents, your sibling, your spouse, your kids, it's a similar process. You stay in contact, you love, you're there, but if you get too wrapped up in it emotionally, you'll get dragged down with them. And then where are you? Then you have to either completely distance yourself or you will fall down some horrible rabbit hole yourself. And so there's a little bit of realism that you have to have when you're observing someone go through something very difficult like this. Anyway, let's get back.
The video I made earlier wasn't an accurate representation of what I'm going through. So I thought this whole time that I didn't miss him. I just missed the person that I started quarantining with. And I don't know how to give my heart to someone after this.
Okay, so I think it's normal, and it's unfortunately normal, that when we go through a breakup, there's a lot of pain. And there's also questions as to whether or not you'll ever be able to love again or you'll ever be able to trust again. She seems to be having that. That's totally normal. In fact, you'd have to be somewhat of a psychopath not to have those thoughts of the pain and the demoralization and the disappointment, maybe some shame or something, and the longing to have the person back but not wanting the person back. It's very normal. Now, if you're going through recovery, it makes it much more complicated because your propensity to turn to substances as a solution for this, and then to have a week-long binge that could result in you dying, which she was very close to doing the last time she had a major relapse, is a complicating factor. And I hope that Demi Lovato does what is the recommendation for anyone going through recovery, which is AA meetings, NA meetings. Maybe they even have opiate anonymous meetings or heroin anonymous meetings. I'm not sure, but usually I consider Narcotics Anonymous for that. And during the pandemic, you could do it online. They very quickly realized we can't have social distancing interfere with our recovery. We have to continue, and so they would turn to doing it over Zoom or something. So I would hope that every day she has at least one meeting. Early recovery, by the way, is greatly enhanced. Your success is greatly enhanced, and your emotional life is greatly enhanced if you go to the recommendation is 90 meetings in 90 days. And I think she's still kind of in that zone-ish of the first few months. And that means you're going to meetings every day. Also, I would hope that she was in some form of formal substance abuse treatment, outpatient treatment, where you meet 2 or 3 times a week in a group format. Maybe there's 5 to 10 other people in your stage of recovery, and you have 1 or 2 drug and alcohol counselors who are helping you. I would also hope that she is in therapy, individual therapy. That's the common recommendation. And I, as a therapist, worked for a while at a substance abuse treatment center, and I was the therapist and the person doing the psychological evaluations for the people who were also going to the NA or AA meetings. They were also going to the group treatment program, and then they were coming to me, and I had to figure out what other psychological issues were impacting their use and their recovery. So I'd hope she has that. I haven't heard anything yet, so maybe she will talk about that. But without that, she's very vulnerable to relapse.
I didn't actually know the person that I was engaged to. Like all the people that were like, oh, they rushed into it, or, oh, it's not gonna last. And then you proved them right. We were only together 4 or 5 months.
Yes.
And honestly, it was false advertising.
Yeah.
When you both got into your separate work modes, you're like, this is not the person that I thought it was. Because it was 2020. You didn't get to normally date like you do.
Right. It's just of course that accelerated, and I didn't even have my best friends to hang.
So this is great. She is getting support. This is a wonderful conversation to have when you're going through a breakup. She is saying, it sounds like she's saying that the guy essentially tricked her into believing that he was someone different. It's a normal narrative. We don't know if he actually tricked her or if she just had a fantasy in her mind about who he was and tricked herself. I don't even know exactly what she's saying. Maybe she's saying both. I don't know. But at the very least, all of us, when we go through a breakup, we want our friends there. We want that support. And it's important to explore narratives that help us to move on. The other thing that I deeply hope for her is that she is talking about how this was part of her recovery, that the relationship, then the impulsivity that she might have exhibited is examined, not only in her addiction recovery and how it affected that or risked that or was a part of the denial of or something, and who knows, there's just no way for me to know. I also hope that in her trauma recovery, that is also explored. This conversation is great, but if this is the only conversation she is having, then she misses an opportunity to learn from this regarding her compulsion recovery, the drug addiction recovery, and her relational trauma recovery. Maybe she's having those conversations. There's no way for me to know if she is. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.